Hey guys, this is Nate again, kingdomofgeekdom.com and Najo over at vampirecounts.net. Um, I wanted to get a video out discussing army composition and balance. This seems to be one of the sticking points that's getting messy for some people, and I want to discuss how not having points could actually give us a more organic, fluid game and actually greater balance. So, the first thing I'm going to try to cover these points fairly quickly and throw this up. I don't have all the equipment I need yet to do a super fancy video, so one step at a time here. But I want to cover these points quick and then get to what the composition and balance I'm going to propose to the community. So I'll also try to keep the cam really steady this time. Okay, so the first thing I want to discuss is points and how they actually give the illusion of balance, but they actually haven't created balance or brought players together in the past. Hear me out if you don't agree with me right now. I've been playing for 25 years. I'm not trying to say I'm better or anything like that. I just want you to know I'm one of you, that I have played by point value systems, that I've been playing Warhammer the way it has been traditionally till now. And so here's my thoughts on points. I've seen a lot of it, been to a lot of tournaments, I've ran tournaments, I've done all kinds of stuff connected with the community, and here's what I've perceived about points. So the first thing is points aren't actually balanced. There's plenty of times where armies have certain strengths or weaknesses. As you guys know, that even if you pay the points for something, we'll sit there and make the comment like, oh, that wasn't worth the points, or that thing's totally broken, it should cost more. It really all depends on when you put the two armies together, or even on a unit by unit basis, if points are balanced. And so right there, even though you can kind of get into a general approximation, you can't get the points perfect. It's not possible. So, and especially when it comes down into movement and the interaction of the players and their skill levels, and even though that's the whole point, I've played games where I've been at half the points of my opponent and tabled them. I've actually done that. It's happened in campaigns and leagues. It really comes down to, just like in historical battles in real life, your tactics, your maneuvering, your deployment, how you fake out your opponent, and you control and minimize the contacts into your favor. So there's that. Obviously, though, the whole idea of the points is that we're getting a chess set, right? We're getting equal sides. But the first thing, points aren't actually equal. It's an illusion. So let's keep that in mind. General weak stuff, if it's all 5 points, kind of elite things are 10, bigger stuff's 20, really big stuff's 50 to 100. Sure, that would probably get us in the right range of things, but fine-tuning down to the point here or there, it's really fairly variable. Okay, next thing is that points put stagnation into a community. Like when we all agree we're going to play 2,400 points or 2,500 points or 2,800 points or 3,000 points, people build to that. New players try to attain it, ongoing players try to reach it, and people end up in these armies that are sort of fixed builds. And you don't see a lot of experimentation. I mean, some players will, but most people I know, they kind of build their army and then sort of stick at it, and then they might get inspired later on to try something out. Sometimes you see some rewriting if they're doing different points, going into different types of tournaments, or if the scenarios are different and they travel around to a lot of different events. But if they play in their store or amongst their group of guys, I don't see a lot of variation. I saw a little bit of it during End Times where people were trying out units from other armies and whatnot, but as the whole, points kind of mean players stick to certain builds and only on occasion change their armies up. So that's one thing that points do, is they kind of put this artificial cap on the creativity in the game. It's not true for everybody, but it's true for a lot of people. And so this leads to that army stagnation, difficulty in trying new units, and even for players who do want to try stuff, they have to rewrite lists, rebalance things. That means they have to rebuild models, they have to paint new stuff up, and there's a lot of labor involved in that. The other thing that a point system usually leads to is the core tax, because you got some units that to get these balanced, quote, quote, balanced armies, you need to have certain things required. And this also means that even though you have more, quote, quote, realistic armies, you are less likely to have unusual engagements, things that are lopsided, or scenario-style battles where two armies that are coming together are radically different in composition, yet they can interact fairly on the battlefield. And Age of Sigmar actually allows for that. I'm going to talk about that more in another video, but because of the tactical retreats and the way movement plays a larger part in the game, and that the units are more individually and whatnot, and anything can hurt anything, Age of Sigmar armies can actually be a little more lopsided and a little more varied in their composition and be more equal. So that's actually a cool thing. You can have a goblin army fighting a dragon, like 3 or 4 dragons, and it works. So again, I'll get into that in another video later on, but the point is the composition. You're not necessarily stuck with core tax in this game, and having fixed point values kind of pushes us that direction, or it can, where you got to have a required core and that kind of stuff. It also means when things get priced wrong, they just don't get taken, and or something's taken all the time, and that's really frustrating too, because then you see, again, more stagnation in armies. There's really great models, the Chaos Warriors Mutalith, Vortex Beast, and the Slaughter Brute. Incredible model, and I think the only time I've ever seen someone take it is when they were using it as a proxy in their demons army as a soul grinder. So that was a model that really would have been awesome. It's actually usually the first one that pops in my head when people are like, Games Workshop only builds new models to sell so they make their rules awesome, and that was a perfect example of a great model that just sat on store shelves, no one ever took. Had so much potential for cool bits and neat conversions and stuff, and it never got used because the rules made it sort of inferior to the other options in the Chaos Warrior army, and it may have just been because its points were too high. So again, points can lock things out or make things auto-include, like the Corn Cannon. You got some stuff that just you're stupid not to take, and points create sort of a limited pool of selection. So the other thing, though, this is the big one for me. One of the advantages Magic the Gathering, yep, I said it, card games, Magic the Gathering has over war games is the ever-changing pool of cards and the sidebar. Now, before you freak out on me, and I don't see miniatures as necessarily equating to a card in a card game, but it's a similar idea. I have this unit, this individual item, I take it, I place it into my composition, and then it has rules and whatnot that interact. And Age of Sigmar is actually set up this way. They technically could add in units and take units out if they wanted to. I don't think there's a need to necessarily take units out with what I'm going to get to as far as my idea for army comp and tournament structure. But one of the problems we've always had is that you don't have an easy way to adjust your army to play against certain builds. So if you run up against, a gun line unexpectedly, or you're dealing with a horde army, you don't have ways to make on-the-go adjustments that are really easy to do. You can't have this little 500-point block and you swap it out. I've never seen anyone successfully pull off with a point system, a sidebar system. Yet Warhammer games would really benefit from this, where you intentionally take units you don't plan to use in every game, and then every time you go to play, your deployment is different. So a sidebar system, or one that's built into Warhammer deployment, could be a huge boon, and points actually work counter to that. So, and then this also, the same adaptability deals with scenarios. I tend to like to play really mobile, which you can probably see that from some of my miniatures here, really mobile armies. Movement's really important. Even with my undead, I was getting Van Hel's Dance Macabre off all the time and finding ways to maximize that kind of movement and outmaneuvering. And, but then those armies tended to not be able to do very well in things like Blood and Glory, where I need banners. So then I get stuck taking core tax, which I'd prefer something with some punch like ghouls, but I get stuck maybe with zombies or something as my banners. With a sidebar type system, you could have units or options for units to be swapped in that are better in those scenarios. So at any rate, again, points don't lend very well to this. It's more unit by unit or war scroll by war scroll basis. So the other thing is, if your army was more flexible, more adaptable, you would be able to have a wider variety of play style in the army at each tournament. And even though every time you deploy and how you deploy and who you face and how the play between the two players goes, that affects everything. It also is affected by the composition. And so when your composition can't change from game to game, your play style, and this is more dependent upon how advanced of a player you are, but younger or new players, they don't tend to really change up their play styles very much. And by them experimenting with different units and getting a chance to see a broader interaction, they actually learn quicker. So you don't, and then us as advanced players, or the advanced players amongst us, being able to have that key unit that swaps out or changes at the right time is pretty vital. So we could actually have more interesting pickup games if the tournament structure we are built for is adaptable and allows for variation in deployment and different units to hit the field, which is what I'm getting to here. So, and then the other thing is new players can't easily step into a tournament and play with other players. They usually have a couple of models or something they thought was really cool. Something I'll throw out there about Age of Sigmar I really like is if I'm a brand new player, and a new player doesn't necessarily mean young player, although they usually go hand in hand, but this could be a guy who's, 18, 20s, maybe even 30s. I've had people that have started that I've seen that are like, they're in their 40s and they're just starting Warhammer. And it's like, all new players, the thing they have in common is they don't know their way around the game. They don't know what armies necessarily fit the playstyle they want. They maybe know the look of the models they like. And something that Warhammer's kind of done poorly over the years is like, someone gets really excited about this cool centerpiece model. And they're like, I want that. I want that in my army. And then it's like, well, hold on. You need, 750 points of X, Y, and Z first. You got to build all these and paint them. And they're like, really? Like, I got all excited about that cool Dragon Lord guy. Oh, yeah, and dragons, by the way, they aren't very good because the cannons just take them out. And you're like, you're actually telling them the thing they love that made them want to play with you, they can't use. And actually, they start to learn that. Like, as they get into the previous versions of Warhammer, every edition there was something not worth using or something that just was inferior because of the point system or the rule system. And to me, that's poor game design. I mean, I love Games Workshop. I think Warhammer's still, the top of the whole scene. Age of Sigmar, I won't get into it in this video, but I think there's some real brilliant design choices inside of it, and if people dig down deeper, you will see them. But again, won't get into that. And all the game systems that use points, they're going to run into this. So you're going to have something in the system because of the points and what something costs, whether it is or isn't worth taking at certain points. And so that new player who really wants to play with that dragon, he can't, or there's something else that really caught their eye that they love the idea of, and they can't just build the army based upon the aesthetics and have it function right. So that's something that I think is important to address, because that new player coming in, regardless of their age, you want that enthusiasm and excitement for the hobby to carry them through and build them into a more and more intermediate and then a more and more advanced player. And that's something that leads to the growth of our hobby and our community. And this also, when someone's in the intermediate to advanced stages and they're still building that army up and they don't have a huge collection to pull from. I mean, I've got probably 40,000 points worth of undead around here, and a huge chunk of it painted, bunch of little side projects and stuff. I got both the full vampire counts, everything for vampire counts in multiples, and everything for Tomb Kings in multiples. I don't have a lot of limits on when I want to take something. I can pretty much build it. Somebody else, just getting started, or they're in the intermediate stage, they don't have that luxury. And so every time they play their army, they're stuck with it, or they may not even have enough things to play it against me in a 2,400 or 2,800 point game. And so I have to just give them some encouragement, say, hey, keep building. If you want to proxy something, we can get a game down, or you want to use my stuff. I've done that for players because I want to see the community grow. And that sends a message to them that they're not, my equal. It sends a message of elitism and superiority. No matter how nice I'm being, they feel smaller and inadequate. Like their choices or their ability to afford what they can afford. And mind you, I've been doing this for 25 years, so I've built up a collection over the years. It doesn't necessarily matter. I don't put a ton of money towards my hobby, but I do budget each month a little bit to kind of keep it going and keep the community supported and that kind of thing. But for people that are on a tight budget, or they don't know if they want to commit their life into this, that's something where they're not necessarily seeing immediate results. And the thing that we're learning from progressive game design is it's important for a player to have those little victories and to see progress and to overcome those obstacles and not feel overburdened by the beginning of the game. So that's what's going to bring us up to what I'm going to show you guys. I think it's important that regardless of the levels we're at and the points of models we have, that all of us can play together. So us veterans can be interacting with the new players and teaching them things. Those new players can be coming up and growing into veterans quicker. And we have a thriving community scene. So with that said, I'm going to get into how I believe Age of Sigmar can actually solve this problem, and that it may be not madness, but a streak of genius, maybe a little bit of both, that Games Workshop pulled the point values off. Because they've had me, at first it blew my mind, drove me crazy, and I've seen it driving a lot of you guys crazy, stomach pitted out, that whole thing. And then I started thinking like, okay, well, what does this mean? And how do we balance? So the first thing I'm going to address is army comp. We've been seeing various systems for determining points go around. I don't think that's going to work. I mean, yeah, someone's going to get points. It's going to work like the old system. But I don't think Age of Sigmar is going to lend itself very well to that, because you're not going to get a centralized place to agree upon the point system. The other thing that's going around is using wounds or number of scrolls. And that's not necessarily a bad idea, but we know, no two wounds is equal. Skaven are a good example of this. The Storm Vermin, the Clan Rats, and the Slaves are all one wound, but they're definitely different levels of power. And ironically, because the Slaves can shoot, they may actually be better than the Clan Rats. But, you can't quite... Those things are not equivalent. If you just use purely wounds to balance that out, you're going to end up with some imbalances there too. So... and then, of course, there's caps on things. I'm not a big fan of artificial caps. I usually like allowing some room for creativity. But then the problem you have, if you're allowing too much room for creativity, you're going to end up with imbalances where someone takes like the all-hero army, and then that's not any fun to play against. So the first thing is that here's my idea, first of all, for comp. I can't completely claim this as my own. It's obviously coming from numerous other sources. I got two good friends, Moses and Chris. Plus I've been bouncing some ideas back and forth with Sun King too on vampire accounts. But I've got, some guys here locally that I've been, chatting it up, daily. We're talking about Age of Sigmar and the things we're learning from our games and our interactions with other players and stuff, and the things we're learning online. And we're just trying to, process all this and get to some good solutions for you guys. So I just want to make sure props goes out to that. Plus, all the ideas that seed the things I'm going to share. Props need to go out to all you guys out there in the forums, out on the blogs. Everybody on some level is contributing here. So with that said, here's my idea of bringing all that together and what we could maybe get out of this. And I want to put this out there so we can start adding this to the discussion. So first off, the army comp. 3 to 12 war scrolls, max 120 wounds, and no more than 30 wounds on a scroll, which will allow you to have the units that at 30 they do something, they get bonuses or whatever, kind of like the Skaven and the zombies do. No more than half your scrolls can be heroes, war machines, or monsters. No more than one of any named unit. Right now that's the heroes, so you can't have multiple Nagashes or whatever. And then 2 of any other scroll, which will encourage you to take both the Storm Vermin and the Clan Rats and the Slaves instead of, just the best. That is part 1 of this. Okay, so and that's pretty much what you've kind of seen out there. But what this does is it means, no more than half the army is going to be these support toolkit type units. And you're going to have wounds are kind of keeping things in check. The number of war scrolls are keeping things in check to an extent. You may notice that the 3, that makes it, there's a small minimum entry, and that's intentional for new players. And the half point makes it so, at least if you take 3, 2 of those are going to be regular units, So there's that. And that's actually not the part that's remarkable from what's been coming out of the discussions I've been having with friends and forum guys and stuff. So the remarkable part, where we get to a very interesting place Age of Sigmar takes us with balance, is deployment. So imagine this. Let's say all those things I mentioned before, things like army stagnation, lack of sidebar, not being able to adapt to scenarios, different levels of players and everything, all participating in the same event and solving all those problems. And this is what we've got. So you go to deploy, you roll to see who's going to deploy first, and that guy puts out 1 war scroll, and he's got a list. So his army's been written, like what you're seeing people post online. That gives us the ability to work on armies together, and you would put the number of wounds a war scroll has, and you could even have tournaments where your army composition is shown to your opponent, which is fine. I actually prefer that kind of play. So I'm going to see what you have on your list. You're going to see what I have on mine in our 12 war scrolls. And player 1 puts something out, or he can choose who starts. Either is fine. Then it's going to alternate, and both players have to deploy 3 war scrolls from their lists before the next step here. So that's going to continue. You get to 3, and then after the 3rd deployment, and it goes back to the first player who deployed, he can choose to stop deploying, or he can choose to continue. If he continues, it just keeps going. But if he stops, player 2 gets to do 1 more deployment, and then deployment ends. So that means you're going to have a situation where both players will have 3, or both players will have 4, or 6, or whatever it is, and whatnot. If it goes the other way, where player 2 just chooses to end it, so player 1 is deploying, he hits his 4th deployment, and player 2 is like, okay, I'm done. We're stopping right there. Player 2's 1 unit down, but he got to control when it ends, and he's seeing the list that his opponent has, what hasn't come out yet. So now what does this do? So there's this interesting deployment game that comes out of this, in that the players know what the opponent has. There's a limit to the maximum number of things they're going to hit the table, but they can control the size of game they're going to play. This allows new players and old players to interact and to, with various sizes collections. If someone comes to a tournament with only 6 war scrolls, they can play against someone who's come with 12. There's a strategy in trying to get the units out you want, and your opponent, and trying not to trigger your opponent reacting to what you've deployed. So if you start putting out a bunch of power units and they're trying to counter you, and then they end it, you're going to be stuck with maybe 3 big creatures or something like that, and lend to a completely different game than if a bunch of regiments are hitting the table. Your opponent and you are going to have to interact and react to each other as you're deploying. So, someone's strategy is going to unfold, and they're going to try different things. They're going to try to get in things that counter you, but they're also going to try to get in things they want to use. So this alternating, and then it's going to end at some point, and you're not necessarily going to get everything out. It completely lends itself to a no-point system. Because if you're familiar, and obviously there's some system mastery here, because you're going to have to be familiar with the units, but we're already there. If you don't know, that's a war game. I mean, if you don't know the enemy's troops and what they can do, which the math hammer in Sigmar is a lot simpler, but if you don't know your enemy's troops and what they can do, then you're already at a major disadvantage. So here you're seeing what they're putting out, you're knowing what your army can deal with, you know the tactics you want to use, you're letting that evolve a little bit. The play style is going to vary, the army sizes are going to vary from match to match in that tournament. You're going to get to use a variety of different things. If you want to change something, you're going to swap it out later on. Not necessarily in that event, but you can build very easily to different, new unit comes out or a different play style you want to approach. You can just change a couple things in your composition, or completely change it and overhaul it however you want. It's really easy to make the game solve a lot of the problems I'm talking about. And it kind of builds in the sidebar. I can purposely bring some artillery, let's say, that I'm not going to use most of the time, but then when I really need it, I can use it. Or like maybe a bunch of flyers that are going to give me a certain kind of tactic, but then in certain, foot slogger games, I'm not going to, maybe I will use them a lot because they're really mobile, or maybe I need those up against wood elves or something. So it's like I can adapt what it is I'm using. And the other thing is the being able to stop the deployment allows us to make it so our opponents feel a pressure to get out the essential pieces of their army without just going crazy and making us want to end it. So if someone just puts out, two bloodthirsters, and you're like, this is not happening, they know they're going to be pushing that trigger potentially. So at any rate, I wanted to get this out. I wanted you guys to think about it. Consider all the stuff about army balance and what point values really mean in games. Age of Sigmar, regardless if you love it or hate it, it's getting us to talk about this and think about it. And I think it's a new way of looking at how war games are balanced. And I think the key to it is the deployment I'm talking about. So there you guys go. Army comp, the point balance, and the alternate deployment. I'd like to know what you think. Let's get a discussion going, because I think this is kind of where we're headed. And it'd be really cool to see what you guys think. Thanks, guys.